All right. Hello, hello, hello. I am Dr. Angela Spranger, and I am so grateful to be with you guys today. I'm happy to share my research and a little bit of experience here with you. We're going to talk today about how to fix your fight, or more specifically, developing effective conflict handling styles and tools and techniques. Now, we only have limited time, and what I want to do is introduce the topic and go through a little bit of information, and then I'll take a break and go back over to the chat window and see what questions you're posting. So I want to encourage you to please do post any questions that you have over here in the attendee chat screen, and then I'll take a couple of breaks and we'll try to answer some of those. So recognizing that conflict is a huge topic and very difficult to try to fix, resolve, or even improve significantly in an hour, let's jump right in, and then we'll see where we go from your questions and what we can do, especially during the Q&A time at the end. I have made sure to set a timer so that I can reserve some time for Q&A overall at the end, okay? Oh, on this first slide, I have to share with you, I'm super excited right now. August 2018 is the global release of my book, Why People Stay, Helping Your Employees Feel Seen, Safe, and Valued. It is being marketed primarily as a textbook, so I'm just sharing to be sharing because I'm excited about it. But you are absolutely welcome to go and try to find a copy online and pick it up. However, like I said, it's being marketed as a textbook, so, you know. But really, I got to deal a lot with conflict and antisocial workplace behavior in this book because it's based on my dissertation research. So no further ado, let's jump into why we're here. I have started researching and writing in the areas that I'm calling the 5 C's of organizational behavior. And this is actually after the book. This is as a result of the research I did for the book. I'm calling those 5 C's communication, collaboration, culture, change, and conflict. So to go along with that, I actually have workshops, presentations, programs. Command the Room is actually a program, team development, moving through change, and here's where we are today, fix your fights. We're going to be focusing on conflict. Those 5 C's appear in every organization. I get to go out and work with nonprofits, churches, corporate organizations, manufacturers, all kinds of different organizations, and obviously those 5 are pretty universal. So I'm excited to share the research, share tools and techniques to help folks to do these things more effectively. I know that they're often considered soft skills, but you probably would agree if you're a manager of people that dealing with people and trying to get them to work together can often seem harder than anything else that we focus on. All right, so our agenda for this time. Well, you've had a little bit of introduction to me. I'm Angela Spranger. I teach organizational behavior, human resource management, leadership and development, leadership assessment, leadership in business, cross-cultural leadership, cross-cultural management, courses like that here at Christopher Newport University to undergraduate students. And, of course, I do some coaching and consulting outside of that. So we'll move on into some objectives and a definition, if you will, of conflict. A lot of folks come with their own definitions of conflict. Feel free to take notes or scribble whatever you want to make sure that you're going to share in the chat. I'm going to invite you to recall a personal experience with conflict. So start thinking about that now. And then I'm going to share some new information, and, of course, we'll have Q&A. And along the bottom there, obviously, is my personal or professional contact information if you want to reach out at a later time to get more in depth with any of these topics. So the objectives, first of all, learning objective number 1 is to define conflict and address 2 basic truths about it. Number 2 is to introduce 2 types of conflict and 5 ways of handling conflict. And spoiler alert, I'm actually going to reveal a few more than 2 types of conflict. So ideally, what my vision here is, what my goal here for you is to help you identify your native conflict handling style, and then, of course, to plant the seed that it might be effective sometimes to use a style that's different from your native conflict handling style. Okay, so the definition. Okay, we think of conflict most often as a fight, a battle, or a war, or being in competition or opposition. I also want to suggest that conflict can be the mental struggle that results from incompatible or opposing needs, drives, wishes, or perhaps external and internal demands. So we can be in conflict, here's the key, without there being anybody else involved. I can have an internal demand, an internal need or goal, and then have an external expectation given to me, and now I'm in a state of conflict. Just want to make sure that you keep that in mind. In fact, now, conflict is a condition in which two or more individuals, and I see that conflicts with what I just said, right, have concerns which appear to be incompatible. That's because I can't necessarily speak to resolution or management of conflict within yourself. I just want to point out that it is possible to be in a state of conflict all by yourself. But the overt conflict is what we're dealing with here. How do you resolve conflict? How do you deal with conflict in your workplace, on your team, with your subordinates, with your superiors, in your family? Because there are two basic truths about conflict. Very, very simple, straightforward. Conflict is hard, and to manage it requires intentional action. If you're not managing it, is it, and I hate to sound cliche here, but is it possibly managing you? I mean, conflict happens. There is no situation, there's no relationship, no team that has no conflict whatsoever. But dealing with it, approaching it, is hard. And we just need to acknowledge that. So I'm just putting that out there. Okay, so what is conflict? Going a little further there, this is what I was referring to with the being in conflict sort of by yourself, if you will. Conflict actually happens when one party perceives that his or her interests are challenged or maybe will be negatively affected by the actions or decisions taken by another party. So that one party has that perception, conflict has begun already. When does that happen? Well, there may be incompatible goals. I may be facing a situation in which there are different values or different beliefs. I come to the workplace with a specific set of values and beliefs, but I get faced with something that opposes them. There's a conflict there. Task interdependence. If there are scarce resources, there's just not enough time for me to do what I want to get done and what you're asking me to get done. Ambiguous rules. If it's not clear how we expect the work to get done, I may think I can do it from home. You know, we often have folks complaining about a certain group of employees in the workplace that will not be named, my beloved millennials, I have to name them. And often they're faced with sort of 20th century or early 21st century expectations and definitions about what work is and what work means and where work gets done, but they're so wired and equipped that they may be thinking, hey, I can hang out in Starbucks, or I can stay at home and be on my laptop or on my phone or whatever doing this work. Well, ambiguous rules sometimes cause that kind of conflict where, you know, the manager doesn't understand why the employee just isn't showing up, but they're still getting the work done as far as they understand. And then, of course, communication problems. If we're communicating poorly, if we're communicating in a way that simply does not work for our audience, there's going to be conflict, for sure. And I put this little prod here. Over here on the left, conflict happens when one party perceives its interests are challenged or negatively affected by another party. Hey, this sounds like change. Yeah, absolutely. It is definitely change. So that's something to be wary of, because when you are introducing a change initiative, even if it's a good thing, like we're going to pack up and move to the 7th floor from our 4th floor location. We're going to have more space. Everybody's going to have offices. It's going to be fabulous. That's a change. And believe that somebody is going to be in a situation where they're perceiving their interests are going to be negatively affected by that change. So conflict often comes right behind change. So the two kinds of conflict that I wanted to make sure to introduce or to give names to, and you may have already heard these names before, many folks use these words in common parlance: constructive conflict or task conflict, and relationship conflict. That's the socio-emotional kind. So task conflict is the kind in which we are conscious about aiming the conflict at the issue, not at the parties. That's the situation that I like to describe where I say, let's get on the same side of the table and put the problem on the table, metaphorically speaking. There are benefits to conflict that is handled that way. There are benefits to having constructive conflict. In fact, in organizational behavior literature, we are seeing some encouragement of that kind of conflict. That is to say, executives are being encouraged to push and promote that kind of conflict. One of my favorite business authors is Patrick Lencioni, and he talks about doing coaching and consulting for executive teams, and he tells them that if you are not pushing your people to have conflict, then you are doing them a disservice. But he's referring to task conflict. And there is certainly an upper limit to any kind of conflict. That is, there is a limit to how much is effective and helpful and beneficial. People get tired of fighting, right? No matter what the situation is, even if it's supposedly constructive, positive, helpful, it's a tiresome thing. It takes emotional energy. That moves me to relationship conflict or socio-emotional. That's the one we want to avoid at all costs. That's the one that if you're a manager and you see relationship conflict happening, it is your job, your duty, your responsibility to jump in and stop it, to mediate, mitigate that situation, because that is a situation in which there are people having their personal identity threatened by the conflict. Their competence is being challenged. You never show up at these meetings on time. You don't respect this job. You don't respect this team. Stop that. We stop that kind of language because we're not dealing with the task or the issue. We're attacking the person. And in that kind of situation, we're introducing perceptual biases. You don't necessarily know what a person is thinking until they say it, right? And in that situation, information processing gets distorted. And what I mean by that is something that seems very straightforward and clear can easily be misunderstood, and people react to it inappropriately. So try to view conflict as diversity of thought, that's the constructive conflict, and use it to help you meet your team's goals. And I hope you guys like my 800-pound gorilla, because oftentimes, there is conflict in a room, on a team, in a group, that we try very hard to ignore, like that, stereotypical or metaphorical 800-pound gorilla. But sure enough, that fellow makes himself known, doesn't he? Conflict doesn't go away unless we handle it. Now, let's go to a deeper level. This is where I was saying I was going to offer you a few more different types of conflict, because I don't want you to be thinking, oh gosh, she just said task and relationship, and I already knew that, and that's so simple, and it's overly simplistic. Well, it is simplistic. It really can be that straightforward. But on the task side, what you may be dealing with is, and I've been seeing it actually pop up here in our webinar, there's been some difficulty with technology. All right, so we may be dealing with a data-based conflict situation. Somebody may have inaccurate access to information. Now, I'm using that kind of loosely with our webinar here, but what I'm talking about is that situation on your team where somebody's been given inadequate access to, or maybe an inaccurate interpretation of some information that they need. And so now the other party who's providing that inaccurate information, now they become a target for conflict. The person who was the recipient is going to be frustrated with the person who was the owner of the information. Why are you hiding things from me? Why are you trying to, that may push you into a relationship type of conflict. So there's data-based task conflict, there's structural task conflict, where there are external forces that keep us from being able to achieve our goals or do what we think we're supposed to be able to do. And then the relationship side, of course, you have just the strictly relationship-based, we just don't click. We are just very different people. Our interests, then we have the interest-based, we have unmet needs. And then the values-based, we have different or incompatible views of what's right and wrong. And we're seeing a lot of that on the news, in our culture these days. So it's important to identify what we're seeing and then try to pull it back and make it something that we can actually act on and deal with. Okay, so here's one of my break slides. I'm going to pull over here to the chat screen. Oh, thank you. Ashley has given me a congratulations about the book. I'm really grateful for that, Ashley. Thank you so much. Brian was having a lot of struggle getting online. I don't see any other questions in the chat. It looks like we are good to continue unless somebody pop something out there right quickly, then I'm going to, conflict can be considered as a debate. I would say that, and thank you, I will probably butcher this name. I'm afraid to say it. Mallikarjuna Karamsetti. There. I was brave and I tried it. Please forgive me if I did it bad. Thank you. So conflict can be considered as a debate. I want to turn your language around there and say that a debate does represent conflict and can be handled in very formal, polite ways, but a conflict does not necessarily have to be a debate. And I hope that answers your question. Because remember what I said, you can be in conflict by yourself. What can a manager do? Hi, JC. I've got a great question from you. What can a manager do to change a relationship conflict to a constructive or task conflict? JC, will you allow me to hold on that question because I want to push through some of this information is going to answer that, okay? But you have hit the nail on the head in terms of what I'm hoping you guys walk away with today. I want you to be able to feel when relationship conflict is happening within you or between you and someone else, or see when that is happening between two of the people on your team. And I want you also to feel empowered to intervene. That's the important thing. Hi, Clayton. Got another question here. Would it be fair to say that if there is a conflict, there is an opportunity for improvement? Oh, yes, I love that. Especially here in an ASQ group, right? Absolutely. If there's conflict is diversity of thought that is alerting you to something. There's something that needs to get dealt with, something that should be addressed, maybe a change that needs to happen. So yes, it's absolutely an opportunity for improvement. Great questions, folks. Gosh, I'd like to stay over here in the chat, but I'm going to close it. Oh, wait a minute, one more. Hello. Okay, Piyush. How to avoid each type of task conflict from going over to relationship conflict. I'm going to ask you if we can hold that one to the end too, because I do want to show you the examples that I've created for you. So perfect segue. Thank you very much. The check is in the mail. I did that on purpose. Okay. So I'm going to put that question on hold as well. And you guys hold me accountable to make sure that if I don't explicitly answer, you come back over here to the chat and we'll make sure that we deal with those. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So what questions do you have? You guys did a great job with that. Thank you. I love it. All right, so creative functions of conflict. I think somebody asked about opportunity for improvement. Conflict can arouse motivation to solve a problem that would otherwise go ignored. When you have someone who is the quote-unquote squeaky wheel or who agitates, I had a boss once who said to me, be advised that this person on this particular team is an agitator, just like in the washing machine. And that helped me because if you think about it, back in the old days anyway, now we just have washing machines that are front loading and they use gravity, but back in the old days, washing machines all had agitators. And without the agitator, the clothes wouldn't get clean. So they can be very useful. You have to start, making that paradigm shift rather than just thinking, oh gosh, here she comes, she's always bringing me some kind of conflict. Now, what we have to do is reduce the threat or the pressure around the issue. Choosing to see it as an opportunity to solve a problem helps us to answer that next question, how? Choosing to identify what the issues are and reframe them. Find the underlying issues. There are always underlying issues. There's a position that a person comes to you with. That's just what you can see, like the top of the iceberg. But the underlying issues are underneath the position. So asking more questions, taking a deep breath, maybe sometimes removing yourself and then coming back to the conversation allows you to find the common ground and even the fairy dust. And I refer to fairy dust in terms of the example that I like to give of a mediation. It was a court-ordered mediation. Two women here in southeastern Virginia, an older woman and a younger woman, next-door neighbors. And the older woman was suing the younger woman because she was not taking care of her property such that leaves and branches and so forth were coming over on the older woman's property, and she was very upset about that. And the judge said, are you willing to go to mediation? And they both agreed. And in the mediation room, the conversation started moving towards why it was so important to take care of the property and why neighborhood maintenance meant so much to the older woman. And fast forward to the conversation getting to the place where the mediator asked the younger woman how her life was going and what were the issues that she was facing. And she immediately broke into tears and talked about her husband who was deployed in the Navy, and it was maybe the second deployment, and she had 3 small children, all under the age of 7, and so on and so forth, just sharing what her life situation was at that time. And these were 2 neighbors who didn't know each other's life very well. And so now the older woman relaxed completely and said she was very sorry for having brought this to court. She too turned out she had been a military wife as well. She knew how difficult things were, and she was, here's the fairy dust, she was willing to ask around the neighborhood to find out if there was a young, high school student, somebody who wanted to make a little money, to come and help the younger woman with her lawn care and property management, and she was going to withdraw her lawsuit. That's fairy dust. That's magic happening in the middle of a conflict. What we need to do then is we always want to honor the position a person brings to us. I hear you, Bob. I hear what you're saying. I respect your position. You know that I have a different position. Let's see where we can find some common ground. You'll hear me substituting the words common ground for the underlying issue, because if you're in a conflict, and I think somebody was asking about, avoiding task conflict, going to relationship conflict, what I have learned, both the hard way in my own experience and through research and observation, is that using the phrase the underlying issue can sometimes be provocative. So if I say, I hear you, Bob, I understand that you've got, a very strong opinion there. I respect your position. You know that I have a different position, but I'm interested in getting to the underlying issue here. Depending on how Bob hears the underlying issue as a phrase, that may help or hinder the conversation. So common ground is a great phrase to use. And then we want to reframe the issue as something we both care about. Like with the 2 women, neighborhood maintenance is important, sure, but if it comes down to taking care of my family and making sure my children get where they need to go and have everything they need, I may sacrifice, outdoor property management or whatever, and the other woman completely understood that. So finding things we both care about helps us get through and reframe. All right, this is where you may have seen some of this information before. So before I get to the actual conflict handling styles, clicked one too many times. I want you to please think for a minute. If you want to share over in the chat, you can, or write yourself a note. This is very personal. How do you generally handle conflict? Now, that first question obviously is just your opinion, your self-assessment. You can say, I generally handle conflict well, or I handle conflict in an avoidant way, or whatever. But how would your peers say you handle conflict? This is where we start pushing ourselves to, get real about it and see if we're being effective in our management of conflict. And then an even more, I think, important question, how would your subordinates say you handle conflict? Because your peers may be less threatened by how you handle conflict, but your subordinates may be very nervous and concerned when a conflict arises. It just depends. So those 3 questions, I do want to give you a moment to go ahead and address. Thank you so much to those who are posting it in the chat. I see the movement over there on the other screen. Okay. All right. Keep those thoughts coming. Keep those thoughts active for yourself. In terms of quality and personal improvement, I'm going to push on. I'm going to give you some tools to be able to identify how you handle conflict in a very tangible, clear manner, and then to handle it in different ways. I saw somebody over here posting logic over emotion. I can relate to that. All right, workplace conflict. What does workplace conflict look like? Well, we tend to have disagreements over policies, right? We tend to have situations where somebody like me, my background was human resources, right? So people thought, oh, they're the no people. They're always enforcing rules and telling us what we can't do. And a lot of the time, sometimes I had to enforce rules that I knew very well had been ignored, bent, or broken in the past. Managing friction between people with competing resource demands. Who hasn't faced that, right? Look, if we make this investment in this new computer system, we are really not going to be able to do X, Y, Z later on in the year, and we just can't do both. So now you have to mediate between the two folks who are really lobbying for those competing demands. And then, of course, you've got personality differences. And like I said, we can't necessarily ignore those. We can simply try to mediate when they're coming up, and we can try to lay a smooth groundwork for what is expected in our workplaces. All right, here's the magic. You may have seen this before. This is from the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument, and I've had the links across the bottom in addition to my own, I'm sorry I didn't mention this earlier, in addition to my own contact information, I've tried to make sure to give you all of the links for the resources that I am using, or the citations for the resources that I used for this. So Thomas Kilmann suggests that there are two key, well actually, all right, so this is the big version. I'm going to go ahead and switch there. All right, two key dynamics here, your personal assertiveness and your personal cooperativeness. So your personal assertiveness is the degree to which you seek to satisfy your own needs and conflicts during a conflict, or excuse me, own needs and concerns during a conflict. You're working to get support for your own ideas or position, and you're willing to put some energy and effort into the conflict. That's the assertiveness side over here. Then personal cooperativeness is the degree to which you're seeking to satisfy the other party's needs and concerns during a conflict. You're receptive to their ideas. You're thinking from their position. Now, the notes that I have in the boxes here tell you when each of those is the most effective way to handle a conflict. What do I mean? Well, I'm going to go back to that larger version. Okay. So a person who, and you know yourself, I'm seeing some of the comments over here in the chat. You know yourself how you tend to handle conflict. If your personal assertiveness is high, and this is okay, give this permission, your personal cooperativeness is low, then that's going to put you over here in the forcing, or a nicer word for it is competing, sort of native conflict handling style. This is what I was referring to earlier as identifying your native conflict handling style. But here's the thing, I don't want anybody to think any one of these is better or worse in general. Sometimes one of these styles is better depending on the situation. And that's what I want to encourage you to remember, is that it is situational which style is probably going to be the most effective. For example, if your native style is competing, then that is going to be the most effective style anytime there's a values challenge. Anytime someone is trying to get you to do something unethical, right, or on a team someone is suggesting something unethical, and you say, no, we are absolutely not going to do that. Well, that's because your native style empowers you to confidently say, you are not going to stomp on my values, or you are not going to stomp on the values of this organization. Competing is also appropriate when there is low trust between the parties. So, unfortunately, that just is what it is. If we don't trust each other, then we may end up in this sort of win-lose type situation. And when you need a quick decision, particularly if you have the authority to do this, then forcing or competing is the best way to make the decision, the best way to resolve the conflict. That works best when the other people involved are willing to accept a decision like that from you. That's my caveat. Now, if you have low personal assertiveness and low personal cooperativeness, that's really going to mean, and I've seen it pop up a couple times, the word avoid or avoidance in the chat over here. What that means is that you may automatically or naturally orient towards an analysis of the situation in which you are looking at the cost of this conflict to me in terms of time, money, other resources, energy. The cost is higher than the benefits of resolving the conflict. I'm not willing to invest that. So then avoidance is absolutely appropriate then. If the cost is higher than the benefits, it doesn't make sense to engage in the conflict. And then, of course, if it's a relationship conflict, if I have a colleague in the office next door and we just don't like each other to the point where we can't have an effective conflict conversation, because it automatically goes straight to, well, you've never respected me. Well, you don't care anything about this work, and, so on and so forth. Anytime you start hearing those you statements or statements about what someone else thinks or feels, you've moved into a relationship conflict situation, and it may be better to avoid. It may be wise then if you are advising someone else. If you have two employees coming to you complaining and you can perceive that this is a relationship conflict, it may be appropriate to advise them to avoid the conflict, at least temporarily, until you can get things sorted out. Now, what if you're high on both? High assertiveness, high cooperativeness. I care a lot about my position, but I also care a lot about your position. I think I kind of default to this one. You may be a native problem solver. You live in the problem-solving space. You recognize that you have different interests, but you trust the other party, and the conflict has some complexity. The problem is one that has many layers and different ways to think about it. Those situations, if the interests are different, there's trust between the parties, and it's a complex situation, perfect for a problem-solving approach. Let's sit down and try to figure this out. Let's weigh out the pros and cons, the benefits and the costs, and let's work this out together. That's a problem-solving approach. That does not work if there's a values challenge happening. So you see what I'm saying here? Sometimes there are circumstances in the situation that call for taking a different approach than your native style. If you are low on assertiveness but high on cooperativeness, and that's okay, don't balk at the words, all right? Yielding may be your native style. I want to reinforce that there are times, like these 3 bullet points show, when the yielding approach is absolutely appropriate. If you are the person with low power in the relationship between you and the other party in which, that you have a conflict with, if you have lower power, it may be appropriate to yield. It may be. Now, I'm not saying in all circumstances and all situations, because if they're wrong, right? If it's a values challenge, you may have to draw a line. But sometimes they care more. It may be your peer, and it may matter a great deal. I have a colleague here at the university who has been on a campaign to get our entire School of Business faculty to agree to all use the same PowerPoint template for all of our presentations to our classes, because branding matters. And that person is on a crusade about that. They care a great deal about that. And you know what? I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fine. I'll go along with that. They care more. Now, that's a sort of generic, gentle, easy example. I actually like to use as the yielding example, driving. When somebody's got to cut you off on the road, clearly they care more about getting where they're getting, and so I yield as often as possible on the road. I don't want to compete. I don't want to force, the situation. I want to just let them go where they need to go. Now, if there's unsteady logic involved, if you're not sure about your logic on the position that you are taking in this conflict, then you might yield. It might be appropriate to yield. If you can't defend your position to someone else, you're just kind of worked up in an argument, it might be appropriate to yield your place and go ahead and let the other person, quote unquote, win this one. You hear me say quote unquote, we're going to talk about that in a second. Finally, in the center here, you see I've got compromising. And I know that in American culture, compromising has been promoted as sort of the best approach to handling conflict. I'm going to suggest to you that even though it is sort of a central position, sort of the it is at the halfway mark of assertiveness and cooperativeness, compromising only works well between people who recognize that they each have equal power in the situation, they want a quick solution, and or there's low trust between them. Compromising is not necessarily the appropriate response when there is relationship conflict, when there's a values challenge, when there is trust between you and there's a complex problem. So you see how each of these approaches fits best for specific types of conflict. All right. Are there any questions we need to address now? I think I've got just a few responses over here in the chat dealing with personal responses to conflict, but I don't see any questions right now. And keeping an eye on the time, I tell you what, if you would go ahead and post your questions for me that you have in the chat, I'm going to push forward, and I'm going to come back and look at the chat again because I don't see any new ones right now. Okay? Oh, well, right on time. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Rakesh Kumar is asking, is stereotyping people can lead to conflict? I think I'm going to reverse that language. I'm going to say, can stereotyping people lead to conflict and how to overcome it? All right, so I will tell you. Thank you for that. That's a great question. Stereotyping is not necessarily a bad thing. There, I said it. Stereotyping is not necessarily a good thing either. However, it's just a thing that our brains do, and here's where conflict comes in. A stereotype is an activated thought pattern that is based on some fact or appearance about a person based on that person's belonging to a certain group. It's just an image or a sentence or a thought that comes into your mind. Conflict happens when you speak or act based on that stereotype. So what I would say is, stereotyping can lead to conflict if you speak or act based on that stereotype. And then you're moving that stereotype out of the brain, out of your mind, into the realm of potentially discriminatory behavior or discriminatory language. So now we're talking about discrimination. So stereotyping is one thing. It's something that the brain does, and we shouldn't beat ourselves up over it. And if you have someone that you can, sort of a mentor or someone you can talk to about it before you raise the wrong type of comment, I would say do that. You talk to somebody and say, hey, is it bad that I think, now I'm a woman, so I'm going to pick on women for just a moment. And if you say, well, I'd like to ask you, I think that women are bad drivers. Is it okay for me to say that? I would tell you no, don't say that. That's a stereotype that needs to stay in your head because it's wrong. So I would say find someone that you can talk to peer-to-peer who will give you good guidance about a stereotype. If you have people on your team who are speaking or acting from stereotypes, I would certainly say, hey, look, that behavior can lead to conflict. It can also lead to discriminatory action, and that could endanger our company. So we don't want to do that. And that's coming from more of an HR standpoint. You are absolutely right. Thank you, B. Chase. B. Chase is saying, you are just scratching the surface of this topic. What can I take away for today? All right, so I'm going to move back over here to the slides, and we'll come back to the chat in a little bit. Let's see, because I want to give you your takeaway before time gets too tight. All right, maybe this will be a good thing. What is the cost of conflict, do you think, in the United States workplace? How much money is lost dealing with conflict? And I wonder, I wish we had time. If we were live, I would have people just shout out guesses at me. But here you go, $1 billion a year. So there's a takeaway for you. All right, $1 billion a year is lost in conflict. That should make it worthwhile to spend some time getting more facile with understanding your own native conflict handling style and other people's around you, and getting smarter with this and being a little bit more proficient at handling conflict in the workplace so that you can, chip away at that number. I've said already before that it's appropriate sometimes to employ a different style to manage problem communications and different types of workplace conflicts that come up. I did try to mention, I hope I said it clearly, no one style out of those 5 that I showed you is superior to any other. Each one comes from a different position. There are only 3 positions, really. There's win-lose, lose-win, win-win. I'm going to go into that just a little bit here. All right, so here's what I want to show you about those conflict handling styles. The competing or forcing position is win-lose. It's I win, you lose. It sounds like this. So again, thank you for holding me accountable for your takeaways. What I want you to hear, all right, next time you get off the phone, you get off the webinar, and you hear people saying these things. Now, this first one, this language is a little bit unique. People aren't going to say, I value the point being made more than the relationship. But you'll hear something that signals that, and you can ask them that. So it sounds like you value being right in this situation more than the relationship you have with Ted. Well, no, but it's him or me. I've got to make my point here. He needs to see it my way. I mean, if he just thinks about it, he'll understand. I mean, I'm right. I know I'm right. That's the win-lose position. Then there's the lose-lose position. I see you, Brian, and we're coming. We're going to talk about win-win a little bit. The lose-lose position, though, is the avoiding or avoidant spot. I really want to hear them out. I'm going to be quiet and listen. It's not that big a deal. It's not worth the trouble. What difference could I make anyway? Listen for key phrases like that from your teammate who's saying things like this. They're taking a lose-lose position. Accommodating is the lose-win position. That's the yielding position, accommodating. I value our relationship more than I value this point. Or let's just get this over with so we can move on. Or fine, have it your way. Does the relationship matter more than the point and the conflict? Fine, okay, I'll let it go. Then there's collaborating. That's the win-win. And that's where the person is saying, I'm sure that if we work together, we can come up with a better answer than either of us individually. Or, because that sounds very peacemaking and kind, but if you're not really feeling all the way there, you'd say something like, I'm not giving in yet. I still value my position, but I'm willing to hear your opinion and give you mine. Finally, there's that compromising position. Now, collaborating would be the problem solving on my picture, right, the top right. And then the intermediate position. You see how what we've done is, in our culture, we tend to think that compromising is the be-all or the perfect, but it's really not. It's an intermediate position. Compromising says this isn't important enough to fight over. I don't want to be unreasonable. If I give on this, maybe he'll give on that. We could both live with a certain outcome, right? So it's sacrificing. Neither side is getting all of what they want. Here's a little bit more about how they show up. We'll call Mike the manager. He'll call his employees out quickly. He does it easily when they don't perform as he expects. If he thinks they're making a mistake, he points it out. He'll do it one-on-one, or he'll do it in a group setting. He's the boss. He's paid his dues to get that title. He's passionate about the work and the team, and he knows the job. So he feels justified in handling conflict this way. Are you hearing forcing or competing right there? Here's Bill. He's the senior on this team. He knows that it really doesn't matter what you do or say. When you're in Mike's crosshairs, it's just not worth it to even argue. Just agree with him, say you'll do it his way, and try to stay under the radar. Is that sounding familiar? He's avoidant or yielding. Todd's the emergent. He's an up-and-comer. He has his own way of doing things, but if he recognizes that someone's upset over how a task is getting done, they probably have a good reason for it. He's usually willing to go along if you explain why your way is better. Maybe he's a problem solver? Jane's a specialist. She's passionate and committed to the job. She's worked with this team for a while, and she knows that everyone means well and they want the best for the organization. She's willing to take the risk of pushing back and engaging to identify the right solution for the situation, no matter who's pressing for their way being the right way. Now, Mike, as a result of his conflict handling style, has complaints lodged about him to upper management or HR. Occasionally, a team member will threaten to quit. Mike wonders about this, but continues to use the forcing style of conflict handling. Bill may become conspicuously absent when there's a hot issue on the table. It's not worth the emotional labor to him, and his peers know he tends to avoid all conflict. He's pretty much retired on the job, and he doesn't offer all of his expertise. Todd clams up, backs up, and says, okay, you probably know best. He thinks that yielding works best for him. He's looking for another job, though. Jane may show signs of stress, but she'll trust that her job is safe and the relationships are safe, even if she pushes a teammate, including the boss, Mike, to think again about a difficult issue. She's proud of her problem-solving skills, but she wonders why it doesn't work as well in other settings. When a quick solution is needed and it's acceptable that neither side is fully satisfied with the outcome, any of these folks may compromise just to make the conflict go away. No one is happy, but we can move on. Sound familiar? So then for your consideration, I want you to take away which style is most comfortable to you, which style do you respect most in others that is different from your own? Which style do you respect least? Super important here, because identifying the style you respect least will give you some insight into how perhaps you may need to deal with the person who tends to use that as their native style. How well do you think you navigate between the different styles? And now I think it's time for what questions you have that we have not discussed. And I have a great one over here about the Covey concept of win-win or no deal. I certainly believe that we should be able to move into, I'm going to push on through this last slide or two here. It's important to recognize, I don't have Stephen Covey's material on here, but I do have some of the Patterson-Grenny material from Crucial. You've heard of Crucial Conversations, I hope. I certainly recommend the book. So win-win or no deal might figure in here where we can decide when I am identifying that positions are different, my emotions are involved, and the stakes of this decision are high, I need to pay attention, caution. I've created this little fire triangle over here to kind of point out there's 3 aspects to consider in any conflict situation. Our positions are different, our emotions are involved, we both care very much, and the stakes are high. I need to move forward with caution. There's a crucial conversation that needs to be had. One of the takeaways from that book, Crucial Conversations, is to ask yourself, what do you really want? At the end of the day, when you get in your car, what do you want to be able to say about how you handled the conflict? Did you handle it in a way that encouraged your team to engage in healthy, constructive conflict? That's what I think we want to take away from the day when there's conflict happening. Oh, and then that's just more information about me. So I'm going to go back over here to the chat and see what else. Now, Brian Miller, hello. Thank you so much for your reminder about the Covey concept of win-win or no deal. It is absolutely reasonable and fair to approach conflict or approach relationship management with the idea that we are both going to win. I am going to commit myself to both of us getting what we need. I think here what we're dealing with is breaking out a little bit more specific acceptance that naturally I have an orientation towards conflict. And I may have to, what's the right word? I may have to discipline my natural orientation in order to do what I just said I wanted to do, which was get to a place of win-win with my colleague. Is that fair? Does that address your question? I believe it is possible to integrate the concepts, in other words. Does it help to move conflict into problem solving by concentrating on facts or the process? Whew. Hi, Clayton. That's a great question. I can only say it depends, because if you're identifying that emotions are involved and there are high stakes, right? Like I mentioned on that last one, and like I said, I do recommend that book, Crucial Conversations. Then staying with facts or the process may not allow both parties to feel seen, safe, and valued. It may not allow both parties to be heard. So yes, you want to try to move conflict certainly from relationship conflict into task conflict, and you want to try to do some problem solving. Sounds like that may be your native style too. But again, figure out, and I should go back to that graphic. I don't remember how far back it was though. But figure out what's at the root, what's the real issue. And if it's something that can be addressed by problem solving, then sure, go there. Let's see here.
Hey, Angela,
what's the best?
Excuse me just a minute. Are you
Yes,
going
sir.
back to Jason's question?
Yes, that's where I am right now.
Okay, just want to make sure.
I see you, Jason. I'm sorry, I skipped you. Yes, the best way to handle the situation when you know there is a conflict between two team members, but when you confront them, both of them pretending that everything was peachy. Oh, well, that's difficult. Why are they pretending to you? My suggestion might be that they are uncomfortable revealing conflict to you. It may be that you are a person of influence, maybe the boss, and so they want to present the best face to you and not reveal that they're in conflict one with another. And so my suggestion for the best way, and gosh, I wish we had more time. I'm watching your time carefully. I don't want to go over, certainly. But I would invite suggestions from folks who have handled this kind of thing. My suggestion would be making it clear to them that the conflict is causing some challenges to the organization or the team's goals, and making it sort of something that you and person A need to resolve together, because now the conflict between person A and person B has caused a conflict between you and person A and you and person B. And so individually, I would meet with them and say, look, we've got to come up with a plan, you and I, together, for how we can ensure that the conflict between you and person B does not continue to derail the team's goals. Does that sound fair, Jason? I don't want to get too deep into it. I'm happy to talk more about that. Should the problem solvers be only management or HR personnel? Gosh, no. No. Everybody should, I think everybody should participate in workshops like this, should get some information to try to get smarter on what triggers them, what their natural conflict handling styles are, so that we all become, gosh, couldn't this country and this culture use people who were more fluent in respectful language that helps us disagree in a civil manner, So no, JC, I think that problem solvers or effective conflict managers can be found at every level. There are people who walk around, I swear, with invisible magic wands. They can sort of spray, or bags of fairy dust. And I think that they should be encouraged and trained. Hi, Jason. Good. I'm glad that was a little helpful to you. It's really interesting trying to make sure to respond to each person individually. But again, I do invite you to, keep in touch. And with that, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to hand the mic, so to speak, back over to my friend Norval with my deep, deep gratitude. I'm so thankful for this opportunity to have shared with you guys, and I do hope that there were some useful things that you were able to take away.
Thank you very much, Angela. We're running short on time, as you said. Don't see any other questions coming through. One thing I would like to remind everyone is if you are in a room and you have other folks with you in the room who may not have registered for today but still need certs, please let me know. You're more than welcome to email them to me. I know that there's a few of you who do oftentimes invite your departments or your coworkers to come and view these webinars with you, and we really appreciate your doing that. Anyway, if you could let me know, that would be great. We're going to go ahead and call it here for today since we are running short on time. I'd like to thank Angela once again for presenting for us today. It was great.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks again to you all who did come online with us today. I know this is our second experience with anymeeting.com, and so far, from what I can see from this side, it appears to be working fine. I know I've gotten a few messages from folks saying that they've had some trouble with it. I don't know exactly how to solve those issues. It may be something related to the computer that you're using, whether it be at work. It could be something with your IT department. You may want to check with them. But generally, if you have access to Google Chrome, it should, this app should work just fine. Anyway, reminder once again, our next webinar will be on Thursday, August the 23rd. It'll be How Mature is Your Quality Culture with Charlie Barton of Barton Consulting, LLC. Charlie presented this talk at the 2018 World Conference in Seattle, and she was very happy to offer this for us next week, so we're looking forward to that. For right now, we're going to go ahead and call it for today. And we'll see you next week. Hopefully, many of you have already registered. It looks like several of you have. We still do have spaces available for anybody who's interested. So we'll look forward to seeing many of you next Thursday. Hope everybody has a great rest of the day, and we'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.